I'm the faculty director of the Penn Program in Environmental Humanities at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. It is my sincere pleasure to welcome you this afternoon to Solar Imaginaries. Solar Imaginaries is a three-part program curated by PPEH artists in residence Kristen, Neville Taylor, and Ricky Yanas as part of this year's explorations on the topic of transition and transformation led by Professor Daniel Barber. Today, Solar Imaginaries culminates, very exciting, with Solar Synthesis, the Energy Proposals Challenge. The previous two programs in this trilogy have been recorded, as is this one, and they are available for viewing, and I really highly recommend them to you. You will hear a slightly longer introduction to today's program in a few minutes, although all introductory remarks today are very short because we have such excellent proposals that we want to foreground. But Kristen and Ricky will introduce us to the program in just a minute. But before they do, please let me very briefly introduce this year's topic director, the curator of transition and transformation, Professor Daniel Barber. Daniel is an associate professor and chair of the graduate group in architecture at the Weizmann School of Design here at Penn. He is the author of A House in the Sun, Modern Architecture and Solar Energy in the Cold War, which came out with Oxford University Press in 2016. And he's the author of Modern Architecture and Climate, Design Before Air Conditioning. As Daniel's publications and projects demonstrate, he is a tireless collaborator, and I've been delighted to work with him on this programming. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Daniel.
Great. Thank you so much, Bethany, and thanks to all of you for being here, participants and observers. It's really, we're looking forward to a really exciting evening. I'm also going to be very quick to just simply frame this for a moment around the question of the solar imaginary that I've had the pleasure to develop both with Bethany and Kristen and Ricky over the past months, really trying to clarify, think about the kind of dynamism and endless possibilities of imagining solar futures, informed by, but not limited by, their, let's say, policy or technological possibilities. So that's a lot of what we're going to see tonight in a number of different formats. And I'm not going to belabor it too much and just let us get to the heart of the matter. I'll very briefly introduce our artists in residence who have been, in fact, putting these programs together as valuable collaborators with Bethany and myself in the Penn Program in Environmental Humanities. Kristen Neville Taylor is an artist working in drawing, sculpture, glass, and installation. Her process has been described as alchemical, and I'll say that we've kind of seen that in terms of her organizational and curatorial acumen ourselves. She utilizes pseudoscientific experimentation to reimagine our relationship to natural futures. She's been shown at Vox Populi in Philadelphia and many other important venues, and is part of the Little Berlin Gallery Collective. Ricky Yanas is a Texas-born artist, educator, and curator. Working within a pragmatic tradition of problem finding, he aims to create intersectional spaces of inquiry and mutual engagement through art making and art thinking. Recent projects include Extension or Communication Puerto Rico at Tiger Strike's Asteroid Gallery, one of our sort of Philadelphia treasures, in collaboration with Taller Puertorriqueño, another Philadelphia treasure, I should say, and The Green Sun, a collaboration with Kristen that in effect laid some of the foundational discussions that we're playing out tonight. So I turn it over to the two of you and with much excitement anticipate a great evening. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you, Bethany, and thank you everyone for being here today for Solar Synthesis. It's been our goal with this work initiated in 2019 through the Green Sun Project to bring together both pragmatic and speculative practitioners from various backgrounds to think through solar energy together. We've reserved this final segment in our program series for the imaginative possibility of solar power. Today, we've invited artists, scholars, and thinkers that we admire to develop a tool, strategy, or vision for the future of energy. Some presenters today have made solar energy a major part of their work, and some have been invited to apply strategies from their own practice to alternative power for the first time. We'll start with some abbreviated bios of the presenters, and you can see the kind of longer versions on the PPEH website if you make yourself, if you journey over there. So again, I apologize for how brief these are, and halfway through, Kristen will take over. So first of all, I want to introduce Adam Gugil, a sophomore at Penn studying urban studies, where he is interested in the role of civil society in urban education and international development. At Penn, he supports localized community development and partnership efforts with the Netter Center and Ideas for Action. And he is also a Kleinman Center for Energy Policy undergraduate fellow. Next, we have Georgia Cariola Hagsma, is an interdependent writer, researcher pursuing an MA in comparative cultural analysis and religious studies at the University of Amsterdam. She recently co-founded Neometabolism, a studio for identity development with a digital publication of the same name, providing a stream of consciousness along themes of climate adaptation, personal agency, and more than human ecologies. Then we have Fields Harrington, who is an interdisciplinary artist whose practice considers the blurring of boundaries between poetics and science. His work revisits the history of Western empiricism and scientific systems, addressing legacies of violence as well as the enmeshment of science, racism, and ideology. Next, we have Juan Hutardo Salazar, who's a designer, artist, and educator with 8 years of experience in formal and informal learning environments. Juan believes in decentralizing the role of storytelling, building environments to share untold histories and collectively imagine unforeseen futures. And then Elizabeth Shores is an artist, writer, and curator currently based in Philadelphia, whose limited liability corporation, My Presence is Productive, serves as a conceptual strategy to eliminate the legal distinction between their research and themselves. Now I'm gonna pass it off to Kristen to complete our beautiful list.
Lee Sumter, an independent scholar and multidisciplinary artist who applies strategies of DIY media and mythic design toward building better, more resilient communities of the future. Her artistic practice, the quote, art of survival, addresses threats to mind, body, and spirit with a focus on the readiness and resilience of Black, Brown, and Indigenous peoples. Brian Sutherland is a PhD candidate at the University of Toronto, Faculty of Information, where he teaches scientific visualization design at biomedical communications. He is researching how the confluence of new low power sensing computers, short and long range Wi-Fi networks, and sustainable energy systems has the potential to, quote, hybridize objects and environments and so change the way we interact with information. Mehdi Torkaman is a PhD candidate in environmental humanities, affiliated with the Greenhouse and the University of Stavanger. With an MA in English literature from the University of Oslo and a background in eco-criticism, he is interested in exploring technologically entangled narratives that characterize urban activities and inform our performance of environmental citizenship. So welcome to our presenters. Feedback and discussion of the proposals today will be guided by our practitioners, Jen Jantana Pichier and Arash Kouarzad. Jen Jantana Pichier is an artist, climate activist, and community organizer who received her master's in urban planning from Hunter College. In 2012, she co-founded the 6th Street Youth Program at 6th Street Community Center. And in 2015, she founded a grassroots community organization, CMB, which advocates for environmental justice, particularly in response to waste inequity in North Brooklyn. Arash Kouarzad is an artist, educator, and urban planner whose work uses a combination of research, creative practice, and multidisciplinary collaboration as a means of visioning communities. He has recently completed research and design commissions for the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung and the Point CDC, and is the author and publisher of the Upper Manhattan Project, an international model for climate change planning. Today, participants will present alphabetically for 2 to 4 minutes each. Our practitioners, Jen and Arash, will offer brief comments and feedback after each presentation. They will use the following criteria to guide dialogue and provide assessments loosely, and we're gonna see, how things go. Creativity, possibility, community, economic sustainability, and environmental impact. We invite the audience and fellow participants to offer questions and comments in the chat, and we will try to pepper these in as we go along. Otherwise, we reserve the final 20 minutes for further reflection and audience participation. So unless there's any questions, and without further ado, we invite Adam, our first presenter, to share his screen and start us off.
You can all see it, right? Great, thank you so much. So hi, everyone. As they gracefully mentioned, my name is Adam. I am a sophomore at the College of Arts and Sciences of University of Pennsylvania, and I will be presenting Solar Giving, so linking community philanthropies to solar energy. So just to start off, I'm just going to give a pretty broad statement that private foundations are going global with solar energy initiatives. This could be just as recent as 2016. US foundations actually started to collaborate with the White House and the Indian government to establish a clean energy finance initiative. This was a bilateral agreement, and they were working with these major global foundations, these major global family foundations, MacArthur, Packard, Hewlett. And we also see this with family foundations, just a bit smaller, and they are focusing on solar energy. So this is an example of the Honold Foundation, which is actually led by a rock climber. Last name is Honold, and they're focusing on solar energy to improve lives and reduce environmental impact. And as they're suggesting, 1 million in grants in 13 countries around the world, all focused on solar energy. But this is all global, but what about communities? So we see this in Minneapolis. That's one example. And in Minneapolis, they're giving grants in the tens of thousands to community centers and community-based organizations that deal with energy and solar renewal and solar access. You could see this with Sabathani Community Center, which is in South Minneapolis, and Minnesota Renewable Now. And this isn't just in Minneapolis, we even see this in Puerto Rico. The Puerto Rico Community Foundation sees solar energy as almost the future of Puerto Rico, especially as early as last year. The leader of the Puerto Rico Community Foundation says that solar panels are actually more resilient during natural disasters than traditional power infrastructure. Another example, the Toledo Community Foundation, they've actually created this giant solar array within the city that could actually while investing rather into the community. And this is all to power all these plants in the city. So it seems as though community foundations can make their respective communities go solar, and quite well too. Besides, who knows communities best than those foundations? But do they know the best practices for this? Now, one example of talking about best practices is coming from Michigan. They created this report called Funding the Sun, Options for Michigan Philanthropy to Support Customers Cited Solar. But again, this focuses a lot on the resources that you can find in Michigan. And I haven't found anything that is related to scaling that all up, or at least thinking about particular communities depending on their region, right? And there are a lot of questions that we could ask. Can these ideas that they talked about here can be applied to other states and regions? Have existing solar philanthropies been evaluated for their intended impact? How do they become informed about the viability of solar energy? How have community stakeholders responded to the rise of solar as it relates to those philanthropies? And there are a lot more questions. So I'm proposing that why not think about a report that talks about community foundations nationally, not just in one state, to creatively grant solar innovations, from supporting solar installation to the arts to policies to help businesses and governments interested in the solar future. As Professor Barber mentioned at the start, we're thinking about solar energy within the confines of public policy and economics, but these foundations might be able to expand that out. So I'm proposing thinking about that from an empirical standpoint.
Thank you so much for that. Should we just respond directly after they present? Great. Adam, I'd love to, could you repeat what you said on the last slide real quick?
Yeah, for sure. So one way to answer these questions, a report exploring how community foundations can creatively grant solar innovations, from supporting solar installation to the arts to policies that help businesses and governments interested in the solar future. I can put that actually in the chat if you'd like, copy and paste that.
So my immediate response is just, I really love the idea of having this report that kind of thinks holistically and big picture about these foundations and kind of applying that directly to communities. I mean, my focus is really community oriented. So, but every community is different, right? And depending on what the community is focused on, they're going to have different just goals and ideas about what is best for them. So I'd love to, I mean, I wish we could hear more, but I was really intrigued by that aspect on focusing on what communities need and communities knowing best about what they need.
I would add to that you know, thinking about solar energy, it's not a new technology. It's been around for decades, and yet it's fairly basic in terms of advanced technology. And yet we're still talking about how we need to grow the industry, even though it's been around for as long as it has. And so the question is, what's preventing that industry? You know, what are the challenges and what are the barriers towards implementing solar technology at the community level? And that's something that I would want to hear you talk more about and identify those, because it's not necessarily about what the community wants. I think that's an important part of the puzzle, and perhaps leading with that is the right thing to do. But the community's been trying, and they haven't necessarily been able to do it. So why is that the case? And particularly looking at utility companies, I think is important. We have a weird system of utility companies that provide energy for people. They're oftentimes the ones who are preventing the community from implementing their vision, right? So, you know, what's the role of utility companies? And then also thinking about, what does innovation at the community level mean in terms of the individual versus the collective? You talked about microgrids, which is a sort of a collectivization of energy infrastructure. But the thing about utility companies is that many of them are actually cooperatives in the US. Some of them are not, right? They're very opposed to collectivization, but some of them are. And so how are you, you know, how are you engaging with that system? How are you engaging with what we already have? So those are just two things that I think might be useful that I didn't hear come up in your presentation. I don't know if that was 2 minutes or not. Seemed like it, but I have no idea.
Great, thank you so much. I think that was a really good start, and hopefully we'll have some more time to dig into those later. And now let's just do this. Georgia Cariola Hagsma.
Sorry, we'll just try to share my presentation just a second. Can you all see that okay? Can you see it? Yeah? Okay, good. So I will be sharing a short abstract from my upcoming thesis, which will be on the human-sun relationship, and I'll be looking at different modalities of this relationship, particularly looking at worship, extraction or utilization, and fictionalization, and there I will also be specifically looking at solar punk. I'll dive straight in, just for the sake of time. But thank you also for the introductions. Here you see the image of a solar-powered future, envisioned by Tesla in its outward-facing communications. An image is painted of an aspirational domestic, raising questions of abundance and availability. A mood is captured of an easeful existence, enhanced by new technology, powered by clean energy. Tesla creates a mode of seeing here, and with that, a mode of unseeing. We see the multi-million-dollar house, the solar roof, and the immaculately pruned garden. We unsee the extraction needed to create these panels and batteries, and the 99% of people who cannot afford this lifestyle. Tesla justifies its premium product approach with the mechanism of trickle-down economics. But is this right and justified? What can we learn from these images? Tesla's aspirational domestic is, in Lauren Berland's terms, an object of desire, painted within a contemporary version of the good life, the moral economic fantasy that generates a cruel optimism. What is needed to attain the object of desire is a price too high to pay for most. For the few with the means, it is too possible and toxic, because it is paid not only in money, but through complicity in economic and political mechanisms of extraction and exploitation, which drive wealth inequality and climate catastrophe. The irony here is, obviously, that the object of desire is presented as a solution to fossil fuel pollution and an unfolding climate crisis involving exacerbating class and racial divides. This makes one wonder about the ethicality of this proposition. It may be true that Musk, a billionaire, is a proponent of making solar energy available to as many people as soon as possible. The aspirational domestic, however, breeds submission to Mark Fisher's capitalist realism. It is definitely easier to think green solutions within capitalism than to think an end to capitalism. In Tesla's case, these green solutions bring scenes of the sci-fi movie Elysium to mind. In Elysium, the rich have escaped to a lush, abundant space station while the poor are living in the high-rises and slums of a downtrodden downtown LA. In 1900, Nikola Tesla first writes about solar energy. He sees it as a means to increase the human population, as well as the production of things needed in the unfolding industrial age, like household appliances and light bulbs. Tesla also applauds Christianity in this text, calling it profoundly wise and scientific. Nikola Tesla was a man of the Industrial Revolution, embedded in a Christian context and a contemporary of Darwin. This likely made him see the world in terms of human accumulation, scientific progress, evolution, and classification. Following Walter Mignolo, this combination of Christian theology and the rationality of science was at the cradle of Western modernity, a modernity with the darker side. The colonial discussion would take us beyond the scope today, but there is certainly a darker side to Tesla's ideas and the aspirational domestic. One example, during the rise of modernity, the meaning of nature changed to mean natural resources. Nature became the food for machines of the industrial and later the technological revolution. Mignolo points out that environmental catastrophe started at this moment. The sun also became a natural resource, providing energy for the progress and accumulation of mankind. This understanding we find in Nikola Tesla and in Elon Musk's aspirational domestic. I would argue with Mignolo that it is vital to address the narratives that underlie the ideas associated with progress in order to develop more inclusive and sustainable ways of world building.
Thank you, Georgia. My immediate responses are just, I really love how you draw connections between, how so many can't afford to transition to solar. I know my mom, she lives in like a small village in Thailand, and I talk to her about solar a lot and how she should be putting solar on her roof, but it took her years for her to be able to do that. And then you also draw connections, to extraction and exploitation and to the necessary need to end capitalism, which I fully agree. Capitalism is the main thing that is fueling the climate crisis. And a lot of folks don't really talk about capitalism when talking about solutions to mitigating the climate crisis.
Yeah, I appreciated all of those messages as well. And I think it's interesting that green capitalism is the new form of capitalism in many ways. As you pointed out, Elon Musk, not only is he a billionaire, but the biggest billionaire or one of the biggest billionaires. And maybe that's due to, something other than his products, but, they have a large part in it. So I think you touching on that is interesting to point out that this is the narrative that's gaining popular support, and perhaps there isn't a counter narrative that is something that can inspire the popular masses to get behind. You know, I suppose there's the Green New Deal, but how does is this the Green New Deal, or is the Green New Deal something different? Or is is the Green New Deal green capitalism, or is it green socialism, right? And we don't necessarily talk about those details. So I appreciate that you're going into those details. And I think in terms of creating an imaginary, what's the alternative proposal? What is green socialism if this is green capitalism? And you know, what does that look like, right? What does it mean, and what does it look like? So the more that we can make that tangible, and the more that we can connect this with some of the concepts put forward in the previous presentation about community organizing, then perhaps that's a process to create a different kind of conversation. But as you pointed out, this is driving a big part of the discussion about environmentalism. And how, you know, so I support what you're doing and trying to divorce us from that, but I want to know more about what that process is going to look like.
Thank you, everyone. Sophia Tarrington.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Quick. And we'll do full screen. Can everybody see that? Great. So I wanted to start here with a quote by Umberto Maturana and Francisco Valeria. And it says, considered, for example, the case of a cell, it is a network of reactions which produce molecules such that through their interaction, they generate and participate recursively in the same network of reaction which produce them, and realize the cell as a material unity. So I decided to start there because I wanted to bring us to autopoiesis, and just for a basic definition of it, we can think of autopoiesis as any entity that can has the capacity to reproduce itself. Sorry, having trouble with advancing these slides. So I'm gonna go here. And I guess for my proposal, I was thinking about the summer of 2020 and seeing these mutual aid refrigerators that are popping up because of the pandemic and its impact on people in economic situations that couldn't get food or provide food for themselves. And so I see this this activity of a community, you know, taking on the role of providing for itself by itself is somewhat similar, and maybe that's a reach, to an autopoietic system. When Maturana and Valeria were thinking about autopoiesis, they were kind of working through that definition. But if we can think about of it as something that can work within itself, reproduce itself, then this can also be considered that as well. So I wanted, but the thing that kind of always stuck out to me about these refrigerators were that they had this cable going into a building that decided that it was okay that they can use power from it, which is great. There's like that still neighborly vibe where people are just like, yeah, you can use this. But I thought, like, what if the refrigerator was a completely autopoietic system, and so it would have a solar power unit attached to it where it can have energy generated by the sun, and it had the capacity to also be powered by piezoelectricity, so that people who are just walking on the sidewalk that's on that same level as the refrigerator could also then power the refrigerator as well. And then I just was like, yeah, and then, like, what about waste? Like, all this food gets composted then and is create some type of biogas digester, and then that can also fuel the refrigerator. It was a bit of a speculation, but I just wanted to keep, you know, this machine in the space of an autopoietic system. And so I was like, yeah, and then there can be a hydroponic system inside of that refrigerator, and it grows food. So it runs on food, it provides food, and then it uses the waste from the food to continue to power itself. And just to break down some terms for everybody and see, like, kind of, you know, these examples in real life situations, piezoelectricity is the electric charge that accumulates in certain solid materials, such as crystals, in response to applied mechanical stress. So the Kennedy Space Center is like more of a mainstream example where they made these piezoelectric tiles that represent, I think it's like Mars, the moon, and Earth. And then when people step on them, that mechanical stress is then applied to like a rocket that launches like in the distance of like those people who are stepping on those tiles. And then in terms of biogas digestion, there's already examples in South Africa, for example, where you have these domestic digesters being installed by the youth of certain communities so that certain farms can make and provide their own energy, a renewable energy source. To give a quick description of biogas, biogas is the mixture of gases produced by the breakdown of organic matter in the absence of oxygen, consisting of methane and carbon dioxide. It can be produced from raw materials such as agricultural waste, manure, municipal waste, plant material, green waste, or food waste. So there are like some urban gardens that have compost on site. I think we, you know, probably all know this, but most of the time it's just there to, you know, as a fertilizer. But I was just thinking it would be interesting to see an available energy source that gets used to power something bigger than just the garden itself, like an actual machine. And so that was the idea with that. But I think in the end, like for me, I'm just trying to understand like how can we provide for ourselves, because, you know, in light of the pandemic that I think is still continuing, we still see that it's mostly solidarity through the community that ends up making the real difference. We can see in this country, especially, that we can't rely on any, we can't really depend on the government to always provide for those who are oppressed in this country. And so through that, we can find other means of community building, solidarity, and other acts of mutual aid through something as a refrigerator that can provide for itself and run on itself. And I'll stop there.
Wow, that was really excellent, Fields. Thank you for that presentation. I mean, I know we have a pattern of me talking first, but I just really want to respond. I really appreciated how creative your approach was in your idea, especially considering how you integrated food waste and how it could be potentially used to generate energy and power itself. And I can really see communities getting behind your idea, getting inspired and passionate, and making it become a reality, especially integrating like aspects of community education. And as you mentioned in one of your examples, I think potentially involving youth in designing this. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I liked your idea of compost powering more than just a garden, but also powering a machine that provides as a community resource. So I would love to be part of it if you decide to make this a reality.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Jen. I don't mind you going first, so please feel free to keep doing that. But I also found this very interesting. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I thought it was a fascinating idea, and it really made me appreciate what I think one of the big challenges of the next generation of design is, which is to do things in a more decentralized fashion, more small scale, and more locally adapted, versus all of these general styles of design and development that, you know, we've been building for a long time. And this is a tool, and I think energy and solar in particular really lends itself towards that version of design. So I appreciate you taking on that challenge. And I want to go back to what you said at the beginning, which was that there are these buildings who let the community fridge plug into the building. And that's what I think something that could be built upon in your proposal is, what's the story behind that? Was this just a random building, or was this a building that is involved in a network of mutual aid? Or rather, they are already involved in supporting mutual aid, but to what extent? And that's an area that can be cultivated, in my opinion, because that's a lot of the times we have the technological solution, but we don't necessarily have the organizational structures or the community, just the network, the community network that we need in order to really take mutual aid to the next level and have it be something that's more available and more reliable, and not necessarily a few small initiatives, but more the dominant mode of exchange. So I'm interested in how that can be built into your technology, where it's actually building the social infrastructure as well as the physical infrastructure. But I thought it was a great idea.
Thank you for those comments.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And so Juan Hurtado Salazar.
Hello. Hold on, let me try to share my screen. Am I good to share my screen now? Cool. Oh wait, sorry. I want to share who can share screens. Okay. So thank you, Kristen, Ricky, Jen, Arash, Daniel, and Bethany, and everybody else who took part in making these events, the past 3 sessions possible. I'm going to try to cover a lot of ground really quickly, so I'm really grateful that you're all kind of here to bear with me. Is the right screen? Does it say decarbonizing medicine on your screen? Okay. So keeping with the focus of this series, as we consider a fossil-free future explored through the liberating potential of solar power, we should consider that fossil fuels, beyond serving as a primary energy source, good and foreign to many resources and health. To many resources, the health and well-being of our communities have come to depend on. Oh, hold on a second. Okay. As we progress on the journey to decarbonize, one facet of this effort demands we seek alternative avenues to medicine synthesized from the material form of carbon, including hydrogen monocarbons. From aspirin to penicillin, petrochemicals permeate every facet of synthetic and natural compound production. Also, as a side note, Philadelphia was host to the first pharmacy school in the nation. So much of the sort of pharmaceutical development in the country started in Philadelphia, which would then go on to become Philadelphia College of Pharmacy, would go on to become the Philadelphia Academy of Sciences, I think is what it's called. University of the Sciences, sorry. And Philadelphia used to be a major drug hub for industrial drug manufacturing. So a lot of the ideas and technology for drug manufacturing has sort of a long history in the city of Philadelphia. So how does solar fit into this? Oh, sorry, many of the drugs, including antihistamines, antibacterials, suppositories, cough syrup, many things that we've come to depend on as a society are dependent on petrochemicals. So how does solar fit into this? The potential alternative to petrochemicals is being explored in algae. A photosynthetic organism capable of sequestering carbon, it has experienced limited success as a viable alternative energy source as a result of other more viable alternative energy options. But as a material, still offers many possible medicinal benefits on our quest to replace the petrochemical counterparts. Algal-derived compounds are seeing applications in the production of anticoagulants. Sorry, I lost my. Anti-cancer drugs, anti-inflammatories, antivirals, antiparasitics, among other uses. However, as we know, the tremendous carbon and ecological footprint of the pharmaceutical industry is not its only problem. Life-saving medicine is often cost-prohibitive to the communities that most need it, and drug discovery projects are often motivated by profit margins, creating essential treatments that reach inaccessible and often unethical prices. This means that there are still conditions today that have not received proper attention from the pharmaceutical industry because the cost of developing treatment is greater than the profit generated by the treatment. Okay, enter synthetic biology, and more specifically open synthetic biology, which is a movement which I would say is similar to the paradigm of a transistor becoming more affordable, and so computers becoming more accessible to communities. So suddenly coding and computation, and so all of the technologies that emerge from these resources becoming more accessible to different kinds of communities. Open synthetic biology seeks to engage some of the challenges posed by the industry by democratizing tools used in life sciences and expand access to research and development of novel biosynthetic applications, including more affordable synthesizing of existing medicines, as well as driving new drug discovery efforts. In the photo on the right is a 2019 Bio Summit, which is a gathering in Cambridge where community biolabs, researchers at different universities, engineers, scientists, and designers all gather to kind of speculate and collaborate and find new ways to bring forward the next generation of synthetic biology, including design and community code of ethics, which is important to try to ground a lot of the work and thinking. Okay, so when looking at, in this arena, let me backtrack. In this arena, the potential of algae as a viable producer of life-saving medicinal compounds as they stand and upon further community research can become magnified. So algae as a medicinal resource beyond its existing capabilities through synthetic biology can become tailored to create new drugs and scale and create more affordable versions of the existing drugs. I met a high schooler who learned how to synthesize a anti-cancer drug for cents compared to a private industry that will charge hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's amazing. So anyways, when looking at these disparate interlocking subjects, fossil fuels, medicine, algae, and synthetic biology through the lens offered by the Solar Imaginaries, I asked myself how can radically new energy futures offer alternative formal and aesthetic trajectories, signaling the pursuit of a more sustainable, egalitarian society, embracing interspecies collaboration toward more just forms of interspecies flourishing. I'm from a mountainous region of Colombia named Pereira, and part of this history includes memories of workers transporting goods on the backs of mules or serving brewed coffee from the vats on mules' backs. In this way, the worker alongside the mule, even if its documentation is often coded to illustrate this is a developing community, feels embedded with a latent understanding of the need for interspecies relationships in pursuit of a more sustainable and joyful energy futures. The mule to me also represents a historical precursor to synthetic biology, as the mule is sterile and rarely naturally occurs without human intervention. Okay, enter the lab. This is a localized algal bioreactor, which sort of seeks to bring synthetic biology and sort of these very advanced kind of tools and sort of trying to recode it with a new kind of framework that I find interesting. The local lab, which stands for the Localized Algal Bioreactor. Bioreactor is a carefully tailored environment that is existing today, used to culture and cultivate really quickly cells, algae, different. It's basically the idealized environment for an organism to culture in. So the localized algal bioreactor, the mobile laboratory for the culturing and scalable manufacture of specialized algae with remediative or medicinal value to humans or other living organisms. Designed with portability and modularity in mind, each bioreactor is designed to be tuned to the needs of specific algal strain and hot swapped like kind of a battery in a video camera when ready to harvest. The mule carries a 10-gallon water bladder for replenishing reactors, and a battery provides energy to power the power rail, which drives the reactor's agitator, sensors, heat, and light fans. With portability and deployability in mind, the proposed design intends to deliver and deploy self-perpetuating organism capable of providing a self-replenishing resource, promising potential medicinal value across geographies. However, one to close with the question that is decarbonizing medicine enough? As we develop increasingly sustainable, potentially self-perpetuating medicines, what does this mean for their concentration in nature and the emergent effects of drugs within soil, water, and animals? Is simply developing organisms that can metabolize these drugs enough to vindicate the quest to end human suffering? So that's just a lot of information. So thank you for bearing with me.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much, Juan. That was really fascinating. And I love how you brought together the two different disciplines of advanced scientific research that's driving, I guess, mainstream forms of medicine, along with just the street culture, and that opens up a lot of questions about what's missing from our current approach to medicine. And it seemed like there was like a pharmaceutical kind of vibe to some of the first elements of the presentation. So that's, I'm curious about what the intersection is between the large scale manufacturing of what you were showing and the street vendors, because in a lot of cases, those two things don't intersect with each other, right? But maybe there is the need to produce algae, or we have the ability to, and there's a lot that can be done with it to produce it on this mass scale. But how is that connected with the street vendor, right? And how is that connected with not only the street vendor, but with what people on the streets or / indigenous peoples think about medicine, and what we can harness from that knowledge about the sun, which is inherently medicinal, right? Even don't even have to do anything to it. It has healing properties. And I guess, how do those two things interact with each other? So it's not a dystopia of pharmaceutical companies running this and like exploiting street laborers to distribute this medicine, but rather empowering for community healers, or for shamans and for other people who kind of have the wisdom around how to create what medicine might be available locally, right, and what might be good locally. So I thought it was really fascinating how you brought those two things together, but I'm also interested in what slant it ultimately takes and how it can be more empowering on the community side versus these large scale systems, which are still points of catastrophic failure if they don't work out for whatever reason.
Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say, I think I still kind of would need to take my time with kind of absorbing some of the concepts you introduced. But I really admire how you identified just how medicine exists, algae being created through the sun. And yeah, I think I have concerns about just big pharmaceutical companies kind of capitalizing and running these markets, especially as we see like COVID vaccines, being rolled out. It's just a few companies that are really monopolizing on the market. So I think Arash brings up some great points, and I'd be curious about exploring what he mentioned further as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. So next up, we have Elizabeth Shores.
Hey, hi everyone, can you hear me? Cool. Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you everyone who's made it possible for us to be here together today to think and feel through these ideas of grounding and world making. Before I begin, I'd like to recognize and acknowledge the elders past, present, and emerging of the indigenous territory upon whose unceded land I live, the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Lenape peoples. In acknowledging this, I affirm my own commitment to the work of dismantling the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism and the exclusions and erasures of many indigenous peoples that continues today. So my name is Elizabeth Shores, and I'm the sole proprietor of the legal liability corporation known as My Presence is Productive, or MPIP. I created MPIP in 2015 as a conceptual strategy to eliminate the legal distinction between my research and myself. The goal of MPIP is to effectuate alternative methodological strategies to portray objective data with regards to the monetization of land. When Kristen and Ricky reached out to invite me to join you today, I spent a bit of time considering their request to develop a tool or a strategy to reimagine how solar energy could function in the future. And it got me thinking about what it might feel like to be the sun and how we can try to preemptively protect it. The sun has been providing the human and the more than human world with a free resource for so many billions of years. We talk about exploiting it, and we literally use that word exploiting as if it were free. But when we look at anything that we exploit, there is always long-term harm from it, whether it's people, natural resources, the more than human world, etc. And so in order to encourage the ethical management of solar resources, we are moving to legally grant the sun personhood in the same way that other natural resources have been granted personhood. So today I have asked my attorney, Vikram Patel, to join us to read My Presence is Productive's formal recognition of the sun's environmental personhood into the public record. Vikram?
Hello, my name is Vikram Patel, and I'm the attorney for MPIP, and I've been asked, just as Elizabeth said, to read MPIP's solar proposal into the public record, and so I'll begin the recitation now. Whereas the sun began producing light 4.6 billion years ago, whereas life on Earth began depending upon said light 4.5 billion years ago, whereas humans have repeatedly and mistakenly viewed the sun as an endless free resource, whereas environmental personhood is a legal concept that grants the status of a legal person to an environmental entity, whereas many environmental entities have been granted personhood through such means as Articles 10 and 71 through 74 of the Constitution of Ecuador, and through a 2019 decision by the Supreme Court of Bangladesh. Nothing outside of the Earth's stratosphere has been recognized as having environmental personhood, whereas personhood grants certain legal protections against ongoing exploitation, whereas the sun's personhood extends ad infinitum, both before and after this statement, whereas this proposal is a placeholder within a specific legal tradition that is not all-encompassing and is not the final answer. Whereas doing so perhaps reinforces said legal problematic tradition and the erroneous idea that nations are eternal, whereas the sun will continue to produce light for another 4.5 billion years. Therefore, My Presence is Productive formally recognizes the sun's personhood now and in perpetuity. Thank you. That concludes the recitation of the proposal. I will defer to my client, MPIP, for any questions or further explanations of the proposal.
Thank you, Vikram. I have nothing further to add to the proposal other than a thank you for your time, and I look forward to ongoing conversations with you all.
I thank you for reading that into the proposal or into the record. I think it's an important statement, for the public record, and it's a valiant effort to reframe our relationship to the sun and to the environment. I appreciate the examples you brought up around like Pachamama and some of these other initiatives that are really using grassroots leadership from the indigenous community. Again, I think that that's something that's missing that I appreciate that's being brought into this discussion. And I also, I think the question is, what's been the effect of those initiatives now that they have been implemented for some time? How is it working out? And at the same time, are the systems of man adequate or humanity, adequate to understand the power of the sun? And what, are we drawing from non-anthropocentric knowledge and systems of culture that might have existed historically that did have a better relationship with the sun? Or are we just trying to, is it still green capitalism in the sense of a capitalist realism and not being able to extend our thinking beyond the current system? So, what's the next step? What's the next step of reading this? What kind of impact is this supposed to have? And then what really needs to be our relationship to the environment? Is it just creating a system of laws around it? Or is it really changing our philosophy and our, our spiritual understanding of our connection, our non-anthropocentric connection with nature? So that would be my review of this one, but thank you.
Hey, Elizabeth. Thanks so much for your land acknowledgement. I really appreciated that. And I also appreciated, like Arash said, your reframing of the sun. And, I agree, we often think of the sun as unlimited free resource and just like, well, it's renewable, it's free. And it was a really good exercise for me to see the sun as like a personhood. So I really enjoyed your approach and your creativity in exploring this concept. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I just wanted to add Rebecca Macklin's question, maybe if we have time we can get to later, but can laws create / change ethics? And so next up we have, thank you so much, Elizabeth. And next up we have Lee Sumter presenting.
Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. So good afternoon. Today I'll be sharing the concept art and prototype images for Soul Shadow, a speculative design solution inspired by the fictional world of Graffiti in the Grass. Graffiti in the Grass is an Afro-Indigenous apocalypse myth set in future Philadelphia circa 2045. It envisions a world devastated by a perfect storm of climate and energy crises caused by the Great Blackout of 2039, also known as Shadowfall. This world, the natural landscapes, urban environments, and life-giving ecosystems of the future recall wasteland and scorched earth scenes from popular sci-fi films like Blade Runner, Interstellar, and the classic Mad Max. Earthbound is the term used to describe the population of people denied passage to off-world colonies. Earthbounds typically belong to marginalized communities left behind on the planet's surface to survive in remaining urban hubs with limited access to electricity, mostly analog and some digital technologies. As cities and societal infrastructures are on the brink of total collapse, Earthbound peoples live in constant threat of darkness, debilitating dry heat, and a multitude of predatory dangers. For this Solar Imaginaries project, I wanted to create a highly utilitarian tool that would be an essential accessory for Roxana Red Moon, AKA Roxy, the scrappy yet always stylish, always smart survivor of Graffiti in the Grass. Roxy is also the badass heroine of the story, and every sci-fi badass needs a fly pair of shades. So with this in mind, the Soul Shadow prototype was conceived. The Soul Shadow design was inspired by the very forces of nature that Roxy and her fellow Earthbounds battle on the daily: heat, light, darkness, and the dangers of desolate regions outside the walls of protected urban centers known as the hinterlands. It was clear right away that Soul Shadows would have to be much more than the standard issue shades. They would have to support the user beyond just blocking the harmful rays of the sun. These shades would need protective visors resistant to heavy dust. They would need to be lightweight yet durable with a comfortable fit for long distance travel across the unforgiving terrains of the hinterlands. Basically, Soul Shadows would need to be smart computers with solar-powered mainframes that could communicate with the user in real time through digital interface on the visor with a sidearm control panel. But most importantly, I wanted to create an essential vision-enhancing, life-saving tool no Earthbound would want to leave home without. The multi-vision feature is central to the form and function of the Soul Shadow design. Through interchangeable lenses, shadows, as we hope they would affectionately be called, enable users to see clearly in day or darkness with amplified telescopic and microscopic views, as well as infrared and night vision. Each POV would be translated via the digital interface for the monitoring of navigation, heat and water sources across the landscape, and users' wellness and vital biosigns. The goals for production would include a variety of recycled and upcycled materials with a focus on accessibility and affordability for those who really need Soul Shadows most, the Earth-bound refugees. Following the production model similar to the current day popular Warby Parker brand, production of the Soul Shadow shades would begin on a small independent scale. Community-run operations led by Earthbound technicians would be structured around apprenticeships to grow production sustainably. Fabrication hubs would have immediate access to an endless supply of trash from countless dump sites located in the abandoned regions of the hinterlands. I wanted to leave you with the working taglines of this speculative brand to further spark your imagination. I welcome your feedback on which ones you think are best. Who knows what darkness lurks in the heart of the hinterlands? The soul shadows know. Smart eyewear for the savvy earthbound survivor. Soul shadow, don't be left in the dark. And then finally, light and shadow, the essence of every soul. And before I go, I did want to give a shout out to my amazing collaborator on the digital design of this concept. That's Miss Malkia Okech. She is from Memory Studios and a former graduate of UPenn's Digital Humanities program. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lee. I really enjoyed your presentation visually, and I just also enjoyed your use of storytelling to present soul shadows. Your concept was really creative and inspiring. And I liked thinking about the future 2045 in this way. I also really liked how you thought about accessibility, as like I often think about accessibility when it comes to technology and tech, and especially, you know, currently like tech can be super expensive and inaccessible to most. So I liked your community approach in thinking about soul shadows.
Thank you.
Yeah, I thought it was really fun presentation, and I love the visual aids that you had, the illustrations, and just the character that you built up around it, and that was really helpful in making, you know, helping me understand the role of the technology and how it would be implemented. And also I want to just see that comic. Like I feel like I want to see this whole comic story play out in the movie and what have you. So thank you for that. But it did make me think about, you know, there's been a theme, or maybe I'm projecting this theme, but for me, there is a risk of growing into a dystopian future. And that's where an overdependence on technology and just a acceleration of the current economic system, like I think is pushing us towards. And because of that, something like this makes me think of a cyberpunk movement in which there's an underground of people who are pushing back against the system and who are struggling to survive and perhaps engage in some kind of conflict at their own community level. Like I think about Elysium was mentioned earlier, and you know, if there is a group of refugees, that's not a pleasant existence. That's an existence where you're fighting and you're struggling and you're trying to overcome that, perhaps. And if that's the case, I think for the classes, it also becomes about like protection and you know, avoidance of surveillance systems, and really embracing that role of being a part of the underground and being able to move around in silence and, you know, not being seen. So I'm wondering about like how that can be integrated into this. And I'm also, it made me think about just like the mass culture that's been established over the past year, and how that can be an element that can be incorporated into this, because we're going to need it, but it also adds to that element of being unseen, you know, and being able to sneak and move around and avoid whoever you're trying to avoid. So, you know, I wonder.
Design, so you were right on point with that one.
Okay, cool. All right, well, look forward to seeing that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lee. Thanks, everybody. So next up, we have Brian Sutherland.
Can you hear me okay? Okay. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about speculative upcycling. So basically, I've been making history of solar devices. And let me just move along here. Okay. sorry, my double screen is confusing me a little here. Okay, so basically in studying solar design, I've created this collection of solar consumer devices. So they range from everything from the 50s and on from that. So I'd like to visit three things. The idea that infrastructure is a form of resistance. So if you want something to be more solar, why can't you just upcycle the things that you own to make them solar powered? And the fact that it's not neutral of infrastructure. So Daniel Barber was talking about passive houses. I mean, the role of the inhabitant is really essential to living in a passive solar house. And then finally, refer to a book about designing indoor solar products, and that batteries may be on their way out someday. So this is the first transistor radio that's powered by sun. You can see there's a kind of a solar panel on the back, and essentially it had a plug. So it's really interesting. There's kind of this interface that is something that that modern products don't have, and that can be more common if people had solar products. This particular one is by the Hoffman Corporation. It was made in California, and you can see the solar cells at the top are still in this kind of circular format because they hadn't really figured out how to cut them up economically in then. But this was from 1959. The other thing is, of course, the batteries. They use mercury in them, nickel cadmium, and of course they use lead solder. So there's a lot of environmental impact from using these sort of materials. Now more contemporary devices. Here's a Samsung laptop, and you can see there's a solar panel on the back. Likewise, this is the Blue Earth Samsung solar phone. And you can also actually get a hold of a backing for your solar phone or for an LG phone. So you can put it in the sun and leave it to charge, which is pretty cool. In that case, it actually calculates how many trees you save, how much carbon dioxide, and so on. Now, one of the things I noticed about this is that a lot of these devices use capacitors rather than batteries. So Citizen Watch Company, this is the first Citizen Watch, and you can see that it's got capacitor in it. Likewise, solar calculators, and there was even a genre of solar power games. Which brings us to 2010 and ultra capacitors and hybrid supercapacitors. So essentially the idea that charge is stored as static instead of as chemicals like a battery would. And these things, they basically don't wear out. So what could you do if you were to upcycle some of your devices? In this case, this is an alarm clock that I've been using for a couple of years, and basically it's charged every day from the solar panel on the side. This is another clock that I've adapted to run on solar. So basically the light from the sun essentially does it. And this particular one, if you have something like a kilowatt detector, you can see that there's, it can tell you exactly how much power that it's using. So in the upper corner, you can see, although it's a 25 watt stereo that I recovered from e-waste, this is actually only uses about 2.5 watts in typical use. So what I did, I've stuffed it with 15 500 farad supercapacitors, and essentially I can get about 2 hours play, and I just need to recharge it every day. And if I was to put in supercapacitors, hybrid supercapacitors, which are 6 times as energy dense, I could get in way more charge. So here you can see there's a hybrid supercapacitor running a Walkman that's been kind of speculatively upcycled. And this is a wind-up flashlight. So if you're a cyclist and you're in kind of twilight, it's useful to have a light on your bike that, you know, basically you can, that's never going to run out of batteries, because essentially here I've replaced them with supercapacitors. Now, it isn't always the best to take something old and not as energy efficient and upcycle it. Sometimes it's better to start off with something that's open to start off with. And in this connection, this is the public radio that was designed by Zach Dunham and Spencer Wright. In this case, you can see what I've done is I've taken the radio and upcycled it with ultra capacitors. So instead, it's actually solar powered, and it runs off of charge instead of AA batteries. And here's a kind of a later version of it. So you can see I built it more into the mason jar shape. And I think Juan may have a mason jar on his desk. I may have noticed it, but anyway, this is what it looks like. And as I've worked on it, you can see the supercapacitor version of it actually has a whole lot of space in it. And I'm starting to use solar panels, which are actually specifically designed or the right shape for it, which is pretty cool. And about a certain point, I mean, you run up against the limits of how many windows do you have. And it's useful just to buy a solar panel and put it on your roof. So in this case, I mentioned that there's a solar panel manufacturer in Toronto. Their grade B panels are like half price. So for 66 cents a watt, I've got maybe a 300 watt panel on my roof, and I can essentially run a laptop or a Kobo, or in this case, you can see I've got a 27-inch screen that basically I'm running off of it. And essentially, this greatly reduces the footprint in terms of using energy. Now, in terms of future technology, there is this amazing solar cells that are organic. So this kind of addresses, Georgia was talking about material considerations around batteries and extraction costs. I mean, if we are able to use capacitors, which essentially have no heavy metals at all, and are just a bit of aluminum, bit of cardboard, bit of plastic, and some carbon, and we can use organic solar cells, which are much easier to replace and reduces the environmental impact. And maybe solar can really make a great impact. And just finally, okay, I guess I'm getting at the end here. So I guess it would be great if more consumer devices were hybrid solar. And the idea that new dwellings are more net positive, energy harvesting and solar enabling. And likewise, I mean, the government is your cooperative. So, I mean, in Canada, we basically, we elected a government 70% majority to enforce the climate accord. And in that sense, you know, it deals with countervailing interests, so hopefully. And then just finally, there's all kinds of energy harvesting. So this particular one harvests heat instead of solar off of waste flue. And of course, as long as our electricity networks are subject to extreme weather events, it's great to have kind of back up your own power system and have a better appreciation and understanding with it. Thank you very much.
Hey, Brian. Oh, did you want to go, Rash?
Go ahead.
Thanks so much, Brian. That was really awesome. I had a lot of fun seeing the potential range of solar consumer devices that could be created from your proposal. And I really liked your idea of using it as a form of resistance as well. I think, you know, batteries are super toxic and really horrible for the environment. So I really enjoyed how you explored the phasing out of batteries and the upcycling of just everyday devices. I could really see this reworking of devices as kind of a tool of empowerment for people as well, in a way that folks are learning how to solarize their own devices. And I think there's a sustainable aspect of reducing consumerism with your project as well. So I really liked it. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you. I thought it was also very interesting, and you know, you're tapping into a lot of potential in terms of DIY culture, you know, and I like that about this presentation versus some of the other ones in terms of there being a range of formal large-scale initiatives versus DIY culture. And there's a big interest in that, but I would be, you know, I want to know what are the DIY cultures that are really succeeding in whatever country it is that you're trying to operate, because this could operate in any country, and why have those worked, and then why have other ones not been as effective? And even solar, there's a huge DIY culture around solar, but how can that be expanded, right? Because there is what exists, but how can that be taken to the next level? So whoever it is in their apartment or in their house, this becomes something that they're interested in doing. So like, what are some of the materials that, and the networks that you can tap into to do that? And then how can this be applied in the case of a place like Texas, you know, that recently lost power? And this is something that if you're sitting around in your house and you lost power, you probably have the materials already in your house. If you are, you know, if you collect this type of stuff. So how can it be quickly deployed in those scenarios? And then maybe through that, it gains more popularity and becomes more widespread.
Thanks, Brian. And thanks to our practitioners, Jen and Arash. We have one final presentation from Mehdi Turkoman.
Yes, you see my screen now. So Thank you, PPEH, for having me, and thanks everyone for sharing all these very interesting presentations. Solar imaginaries are as much bound to fictional or non-fictional stories about technology as they are to sustainable mechanisms that enable stories to survive. In this presentation, after going through a bit of history, I'm going to talk about the idea of a public platform for recycling solar stories. The person in the image is Morten Harket, frontman of the synth pop band Aha, talking about the potentials and advantages of solar energy. It is a frame from a short film made in 1991 called The Sunshine Revolution, which accompanied a book by the same title written by the architect Harald Røstvik. Røstvik, day 71, and a professor of urban planning in the University of Stavanger, is referred to by many as the father of solar energy in Norway. He has been active in promoting solar energy in the cold and dark Norway for over 40 years. Solar energy in Norway, it still sounds science fictional. However, the Sunshine Revolution is quite convincing. Even back in 1991, the solar future is far from fictional. In the film, we see, among others, Chanel, the first modern energy autonomous house in Europe that Harald Røstvik designed in 1985 and exhibited in the Buildings for Future exhibition in 1989. This picture from the newspapers, we see a shot from the making of the Sunshine Revolution. The car is the first electric car brought to Norway by Røstvik and his friends, here being loaded with the surplus electricity that the solar panels on Chanel have generated. As a solar storyteller, Røstvik has used all the devices from architecture to books and articles and a film to show us a promising step toward a low-consumption solar-powered dwelling, even in the most unimaginable of places. He has built part of a future he wished to see. So what are the reasons that now, precisely 30 years after the film, solar energy is still an alien idea for many Norwegians? Why has anyone, I ask in Stavanger, barely heard of Chanel? Why did the Sunshine Revolution never really happen? The story about the future can only shine as long as we retell it, as long as we allow it to be repeated and recycled. Lack of sustainable infrastructure that facilitates the recycling of stories diminishes the chance of survival for solar imaginaries. A disempowered solar imaginary is incapable of competing with stories that are continuously greenwashing black gold, and we need to find our way out of this problem by social innovation. Just as we think about new ideas and technologies, we need to imagine how to renew stories and create platforms for their artistic recycling. The Sunshine Revolution is a renewable story. My idea is to make a solar-powered spin-off of the Sunshine Revolution. I'm going to use a solar-powered camera to make a film that for now I have thought to call the Sunshine Convolution. I here want to use filmmaking as a generative and collective process where I am hoping to document the attempt to make a solar-powered pop-up cinema for a screening of the Sunshine Revolution in its 30th anniversary. I'm going to interview those involved in the making of the old film about their effort in promoting the solar imaginary and try to generate insight into the multifaceted obstacles that hindered the imaginary from catching on in the country that claims to be a forerunner in energy transitions. Furthermore, I'm going to try to convince Røstvik to design a permanent solar-powered cinema for the city, where visual stories about solar energy can be recycled. I also wish to have Morten Harket entertain the idea of a solar-powered electronic music festival. What I hope to achieve is to animate an imaginary of solar-powered cultural platforms that continuously renew solar imaginaries by displaying solar-powered art. I can feel a potential in stories about sunlight, the storyteller are powered by the sun. There's a powerful beauty, the image of the sun reflecting upon its own materiality. And yes, renewable energy is no longer a new story, but a renewable one. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. I thought that was a great way. I think that's a great last presentation and brings in a lot of new perspectives on how we talk about energy and how we come to understand what energy is. For, you know, at the local level, I think we're talking about this concept of the sun, and it's something that we're all familiar with. You know, it's one of our first experiences as human beings, and yet it has a different impact and reaches everyone differently, right? Quite literally, wherever you're standing, you'll have a different relationship with the sun, and it's constantly changing over time. So I like this idea of documentation and local experience and filmmaking as you coming to understand your own relationship with the sun, and what it means for the place that you're researching, or whatever, you know, whatever place this proposal is for. And I could see this as a new tool in our own local processes for understanding energy. So I like this as a, you know, a new mode of production, you know, and of thinking around the sun and of how we engage with the concept. So I really appreciate that, and would want to know how it's being more localized, and, you know, how is it really getting into telling the story, you know, telling that local story for every different place, you know, if that makes sense. Sorry.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting how, you know, this idea and movie just kind of disappeared. So I like how you're proposing to kind of reactivate that story and bring it back to life, almost, you know, in reviving this concept and through interviews. I think that would be really interesting. I think something that stuck out to me from your presentation was this concept of like a solar powered cinema and a solar powered electronic music festival. I think that will be really interesting to introduce, like, by developing big public spaces that are powered by solar. I think that I could see that as a vehicle for bringing the idea of solar energy more mainstream and kind of more integrated into the public, because I think people are still kind of like not really sure about how solar will work or how renewables will really fit into our modern day society. I think people are still really confused by it. So thank you for your presentation.
Oh, thank you everyone so much for all those amazing presentations, such a wide variety. It seemed like some common themes that were coming up were this idea of like decentralizing community-minded and community-driven structures and projects, and rallying behind thought leaders, especially Indigenous thought leaders. I love this idea of like archiving the stories of solar as a tool and strategy. And also, you know, the ever-present question of who's in control and who benefits. We have a few minutes for some questions and comments from the audience. We'd love for everyone to chime in. Any thoughts that we can follow up on some of the presentations.
One thing from earlier, what was the question around Elizabeth's project about the ethical and the, I'm trying to find it in the chat, but does anyone remember that prompt?
Oh, was that the one that I shared?
Yes, Rebecca, yeah.
Hi. Yeah, I was really taken with Elizabeth's idea, and I have, you know, watched these kind of like amazing events happen where, like, yeah, rivers have been kind of granted legal personhood, and I completely agree with the need to sort of follow Indigenous leaders and Indigenous legal thought traditions too in this. But I guess maybe from a cynical point of view, I am wondering how much law and legislation has the power to shape and change values and ethics, which I think is maybe the point that Arash was sort of gesturing to when he was kind of prompting Elizabeth to say, well, what happens next? What effect could this have?
Well, I mean, yeah, certainly when I was talking to Ricky and Kristen about what I could potentially do, I said that whatever I came up with was not going to be something that was pragmatic. What was said is not something that's being legally entered into law. This isn't something that we have to go to City Hall to have stamped in, but instead was meant to be something that would kind of draw out these questions. Because I also agree that with what I'm hearing from both of you, that, you know, it's not enough to just use the same legal code that's been used historically to create such, you know, violent histories and traditions that are ongoing, especially when we're talking about how we continue forward into outer space, into all of these other ideas of futurity and world making. So like, I'm so glad that you guys brought those things up, and I just wanted to note that it was meant more for discussion. And there's, you know, such a huge tradition of this kind of personhood in terms of some of the directions that this is going now. There was the question, like, how is this something that's even being useful, you know, right now? And in fact, one of the first cases was brought up for La Ley de la Derecha de la Tierra Madre, the Ecuadorian Constitution, Articles 10 and 71 through 74, giving human personhood, granting ecosystems the right to exist and flourish. There are cases that are actually being held right now as a result of this. There is the question, of course, like, who's able to afford those kind of cases? How is that going to be funded? How do we even decide who is, you know, in charge of the voice of the ecosystem of these different things? I don't want to pretend that I have any idea of what the answer is, but instead it's more intended for conversation.
Yeah, sometimes these like limitations of thinking can prompt us to kind of re-encounter the idea and like push past it. I think this was such a wonderful performance as well, Elizabeth, kind of like, you know, bringing in the actual, your legal representative was like such a special note, I think. So thank you for that. I think Siddharth has a question, and maybe we might have to wrap it up after that.
Sure, thanks. I'm sitting with Margareta Brecos, one of the founders of the Rjukan Solarpunk Academy. I'm visiting, it's an artistic collaborator, and we've been really enjoying these performances. And I guess the question that came to mind, we've also been chatting while listening to all of you, is how do we reach out to not like-minded others, but people who might not be convinced, might not share the essential agreements, let's say, that we have? How do we bring them to the table to be part of the kinds of conversations that we have like this? And I see that certainly as part of the way forward, but I think that's one of the biggest challenges. So I'm curious if any of the speakers had thoughts to share on that.
I mean, I'm not to pass it off to anyone, but I keep thinking about Juan's Mule as like a kind of futurist performance, like antiquated futurist performance or something that could also not only bring like legitimate or like real technology, but also a kind of image of distribution of technology, and that's not like not top down, that could kind of flatten the playing field.
Can I add to that? Just sort of, that's one of my interests is how we illustrate modernity. You know, some of the people that we might be thinking of that maybe reject sustainable energy or reject climate change, or you know, there's certain my brain tries to approach it from multiple perspectives. Like I have friends that grew up in fracking country, and they grew up in this comprehensive environment designed to coerce their worldview to be compatible with fossil fuels. Like they'll have industry professionals as children going and promoting fracking industry. So it's just like such a comprehensive system of indoctrination that from the beginning, I just really have to understand that I grew up in an entirely different environment that makes me more receptive to the possibility that climate change, it does exist, that it is destroying our environments, that science is the way to really try to process the future, but also not. I feel like right now there's been so much polarity that we kind of create this one-dimensional character of like what the people that are going to be left behind through science, through progress. And so my personal challenge has just been reminding myself that these are people, they grew up in a different environment, and the way forward is just to like reach out, because that's like breach our individual bubbles. Us together collectively, especially now through digital technology and Zoom, the bubbles we cohabitate are more like physical than ever. We choose to coexist within this space and communicate, and other people will never get this link. It's as simple as that. It becomes weird that the more streamlined things become, the more isolated we become from the people that could use these ideas. Now I'm rambling, but my first challenge is just remember that they grew up in a different social infrastructure.
So unfortunately, I think we're at time. Thank you everyone for coming. It was just a pleasure to witness and experience all of these presentations. I think me and Kristen took a lot of notes, and I think it is something that we would love to reproduce down the road. And I think we learned a lot here as well. Like, you know, a lot of these things that we do, Kristen and I are artists, and we're always kind of testing our environment, testing our ideas, and this is one of many projects that we are kind of have done together, and it's been a pleasure to share that with Kristen, and also to do that with Kristen and share it with everyone here. Kristen, do you have anything to say? And then we'll pass it off to Bethany so she can take us out.
I mean, just thank you, and I think I'll be like digesting and reflecting for the next few days, and hope that we can stay in touch. Yeah, definitely not enough time. It was an experiment for us. So, you know, thank you for everyone for the rapid fire, and Arash and Jen, you were amazing. So thank you. That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Oh, I just really also want to thank especially the presenters and the commenters. I mean, really rich comments on the fly. That was a very impressive job, really responding to diverse and fascinating in very different way proposals. It's been such a pleasure to host the Solar Imaginaries and to have Ricky and Kristen in remote residency with us. As we think about what might emerge out of these challenges, I want to draw your attention to an ongoing project that PPEH has, which is called the Ecotopian Toolmakers Program. It was on hiatus last year because of COVID, but we are optimistic to be able to relaunch, which allows for prototypes for such experimental and speculative projects to be modestly funded. I wish I could say it was a kind of on a foundational scale, like we heard about in the first challenge presenter, but it is modest funding. We've had great success with some of these projects, so stay tuned. And please, I hope everyone will join me in congratulating the presenters on their terrific work. We'll hope to see you at PPEH's next program. Please check the events calendar. It's always great to see you. And thanks so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you.